Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. The poet Robinson Jeffers says that our language and mathematics parallel reality without touching it. And he characterizes our human concepts as dust in a whirlwind, making the wild wind visible. And I think that's a beautiful way to look at it. The wind is there regardless, and our language gives us index points. But the way that our language indexes reality is often quite different from the way that science indexes reality. And this creates some tension between language and science. Or at a minimum, it creates a lot of opportunities for people on the internet to say, did you know that a tomato is actually a fruit or a bird is actually a dinosaur? The reason those did you know actually factoids work is because they challenge our language with the categories of our science. But they categorize things differently. So in science, the way something is defined is a box. Hopefully scientists will find this reasonably accurate to their way of thinking. We need to define things clearly, and to a certain extent that involves excluding things, right? Something has to be inside and outside of that box. So how do we define a dinosaur in science? Well, as I understand it, dinosaurs are animals that share a most recent common ancestor. This would be the most recent common ancestor of Triceratops and a chicken, and the sandhill cranes singing behind me. And that most recent common ancestor had certain innovative features of anatomy that no previous animal had. Something about the hip, for example, is a little bit different. Potentially feathers are actually present, or something like the barbed feathers of birds' eyelashes are present in that earliest dinosaur. So anything descended from that latest common ancestor of Triceratops and a chicken is a dinosaur, even if it changes significantly, right? A chickadee is really, really different from the first dinosaur. It's still a member of the family. Just like I'm still a member of my family, I'm still descended from, the earliest person named Crawford, even if I'm really, really different from him, right? It's defined by ancestry, not by, you can't be defined out of it, as long as you're descended from that ancestor point. But that's a scientific definition, and the reason that did you know birds are really dinosaurs still conflicts with us in our minds is that dinosaur as a word is a magnet, it's not a box, right? So I think that in language, usually what we have are boxes, instead of boxes, we have magnets. Words are magnets, scientific terms are boxes. So the word dinosaur, the features that it sort of magnetizes to itself are things like big and teeth and old. And a chickadee doesn't fall into that very well because a chickadee isn't big, it doesn't have teeth, and it isn't old. But a Tyrannosaurus rex fits into that really nicely. And a Tyrannosaurus rex is probably our default picture, most people's default picture of dinosaur. So the way that I look at semantics, and I've spent a lot of time studying semantics, I'm very interested in the semantics of color, which I'll come back to briefly, although I've talked about that a ton in a lot of other videos. In semantics, I think that it's best to think of most words, their content, as focused on something, right? So dinosaur, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Let's say a Tyrannosaurus rex. Bird, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Let's say a chickadee. Those are two different points. But that dinosaur concept focused on Tyrannosaurus rex, again, magnetizes things that are also big, also have teeth, are also old. So you get some positives that are positives. You get, okay, an Allosaurus falls into that too. I guess the Triceratops, although the teeth thing isn't really there. And you get some false positives, right? You get like a Dimetrodon, which isn't technically a dinosaur in scientific terms. You get a pterodactyl, which isn't a dinosaur in scientific terms. But you don't easily get chickadee, because again, the magnet is actually focused on that big, toothy, old thing, Tyrannosaurus. It's not about what falls into a box, it's what gets attracted to a magnet. Bird attracts features like feathered, flying, and small, right? So actually cranes are not necessarily among our best examples of birds from a semantic point of view, even though they're, technically birds. And I think that looking at words as magnets and scientific categories as boxes helps shed a lot of light and helps us let go of some of our tensions, right? Like, oh, it's so weird for me to think of birds as dinosaurs. That's fine, right? Dinosaur is a word to you, just doesn't magnetize a bird. You can distinguish between how you use the word versus how you understand science. Same way that dog, probably the first thing that comes to mind is something like a golden retriever, and that's fine, right? I mean, like, you can maybe include on the edges cases like poodles and wolves, but it's fine that those are sort of edge cases. Our language is never going to precisely represent reality. As Jeffers says, it's going to run parallel to it. It's going to be the dust and the whirlwind that makes the wild wind visible. And I think that we can accept that and live with that, and that we have to. And it's one of the really fascinating things to me about language is how differently some languages do these things, and it often involves having really different magnets, as it were, rather than different boxes. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Let me just remind you, folks, that you can reach out to my friends and partners at Grimfrost in Sweden to get all kinds of cool replica Viking stuff, as well as cool Viking shirts and things with runes on them often that I've done, and also my books. And that if you head over to grimfrost.com, you should let them know that you heard about them here. And remember that in May 2026, they are still eating import tariffs and taxes. So, soak up their generosity on that. All right, so back to my magnets thing. This is part of what comes up with color. I've talked about color so much, and the way that I've talked about color is sometimes a little bit pseudoscientific, right? I mean, I had a video a couple months ago where I talked about the Old Norse classification of color, and I did categorize it by boxes a little bit, the way that I divvied up the color wheel. But I think that it might be more realistic to think about color in Old Norse or in English or in any language. Color terms are magnets, right? Red is focused close to the color of blood, and anything sufficiently like that is going to get magnetized to that red category. Now, English has an orange magnet, so that's going to pull toward it things that have a color that is similar to an orange fruit. Old Norse doesn't have that orange magnet, so those things get drawn into the orbit of the red magnet. You could also think these are sort of orbits rather than magnets, but I kind of like the magnet metaphor that I've come up with here. Let me show you what I mean with just a sort of an insert in this. What color is this? There's no objective answer, right? There's no cosmic thing that is the color red or the color orange or whatever. Now, English has a magnet, a hue concept that is close to this point called orange, and this gets drawn into that magnet. Old Norse has no orange hue magnet. It has a red magnet, rauður. It has a magnet, bleikr, that we can use to indicate that a color is not exactly blood red. This could be drawn into either one, but by default it's going to get drawn into that red, rauður magnet. It's only going to be drawn into the bleikr magnet if I need to contrast this with something that is genuinely red, right, like blood. And so it's not that those are, worse than each other, better than each other, less scientific, more scientific than each other. The scientific categorization of color, in optical science is a different thing, right? So sometimes when I say that Old Norse fundamentally divides the color spectrum into red, green, and blue, people hear that and say, oh, well, that's more right? Isn't that more like how optics works? That's not at all the question. Nobody, especially in the pre-modern world, is thinking about the optical organization of color. It's just that they have a really strong red magnet, green magnet, and blue magnet, and those draw to themselves things that are caught by other magnets in English, right? An orange magnet, a yellow magnet, a purple magnet that they don't have. And, it's not like there is a truly scientific objective way to divvy up that color spectrum, right? I mean, like, there's certain hues you can characterize in certain scientific ways, but you can't say, like, you know, if you make a set of 1,000 squares all over the color spectrum like they do in that game, Hues and Cues, you cannot scientifically define what the borders of red are, the borders of orange are, the borders of yellow are. Again, I think that English speakers really just have a magnet on one particular square that draws the other squares that are close enough into it. So if you think of words as magnets, again, I think that it kind of frees you from some of the factoidism that we tend to indulge in, right? Oh, did you know tomato is really a fruit? Like, okay, if you're scientifically defining fruit, however botanists do, sure, but that is not the magnet for my fruit category, right? The magnet for my fruit category is an apple, right? So it's magnetizing things with properties like sweet, properties like grows on a tree above me, that tomatoes just don't have. And so it's not exactly wrong that that's surprising, because the language is working parallel to but distinctly from the science. As long as I'm able to think scientifically when I need to, the language really can't work scientifically, because really language tends to be only as specific as it kind of needs to be, right? I mean, I've talked a little bit recently, probably really bored and oddly irritated people with my little disquisition about the fact that them is really just a third person pronoun that means anybody, right? And it's singular or plural. That's just how it works in our brains now. I'm not making a value judgment about it. We don't typically need a lot of specificity when we're saying them, right? Who parked that car there? Oh, I didn't see them. Who cares who that was, right? The them is just, it's a placeholder for any human being, and who cares? And, you know, fruit is the same way. I'm going to the store to buy fruit. If I come back with tomatoes, even if you scientifically understand that a tomato is a fruit, you know that's not what I was telling you I was going to do, right? I was going to go get bananas and oranges and apples. So between the magnet of words and the boxes of science, there is some tension, but that tension doesn't make science or language worse. It just means they're for two different things. And of course, language was here first, both among human beings in general and in each one of us, particular human beings. And it's always going to kind of dominate how we think about the world outside of those professional scientific contexts. All right. I think I said my say all right. And from beautiful Colorado, thank you so much for your time and your support of the channel, especially those of you supporting the channel on Patreon. And yeah, from beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.